Hello and welcome. I'm Allison Stagner. I'm the Director of Events and Outreach at Seattle Arts and Lectures. Welcome to an evening with the full Circle Everest team. Thank you. As we begin, I want to acknowledge that wherever you are joining us from, whether in person tonight or online, we are on the unceded lands of Indigenous people. Here in Seattle, we stand on the traditional lands of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Duwamish, Suquamish, Stillaguamish, and Muckleshoot people. We recognize the stewardship of this land where we now live and work, and the disruption of their care by colonization. At SAL, we are committed to supporting and building relationships with Native communities through real action, connecting with the Duwamish tribe through Real Rent Duwamish, and learning about and featuring the works of Indigenous writers and thinkers. Whether you are joining us in person or if you are one of the 250 households watching online tonight, welcome. This evening could not have been possible without you, and it could not have been possible without our incredible partners, so I'd love to take a moment to just recognize them all. Thank you to our co-presenter, the Trust for Public Land. Trust for Public Land is a national nonprofit that works to connect everyone to the benefits and joys of the outdoors. As a leader in equitable access to the outdoors, TPL works with communities to create parks and protect public land where they are needed most. Thanks to our season presenting sponsor, the Seattle Times. Thank you to the many community partners here tonight, including Arc'teryx, Climbers of Color, Golden Bricks Events, the Mountaineers, Mountains to Sound Greenway Trust, Nepal Seattle Hiking Community, Trail Mixed Collective, and Washington Trails Association. We invite you to connect with these great organizations at our table fair in the lobby after the event. And, by the way, if you entered the Arc'teryx raffle, swing by their table on the way out to see if you won. Special thanks for major support of SAL's public programs goes to Amazon, the Amazon Literary Partnership, Arts Fund, the City of Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, the Echo Fund, the Edgewater Hotel, the Four Seasons Seattle, the Margaret Casey Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Neshome Family Foundation, the Thompson Hotel, the Washington State Arts Commission, and the Washington State Department of Commerce. And finally, thanks to all of you for joining us. Could we have a round of applause for all of our supporters? Thanks. The format for this evening will be a conversation with Full Circle teammates Philip Henderson, Dom Mullins, and Adina Scott, moderated by Mitsu Iwasaki. Mitsu is the Associate Vice President and Northwest Director of the Trust for Public Land. Born in Japan, Mitsu's family immigrated to Seattle when he was 6. Growing up in the relative comfort of the suburbs, his parents felt it would be best to build his character by sending him to work on a commercial fishing boat in Chignik, Alaska. Those experiences sparked an enduring love for wild places, inspiring a lifelong journey of adventure and exploration of landscapes, both natural and personal. Mitsu will incorporate as many of your questions into the conversation as possible. You can submit a question for the Q&A by going to slido.com and entering the code SALTPL. This is also in your pre-event email. You can also use that same hashtag if you are posting online tonight. We always begin our events with a reading by a writer from our Writers in the Schools or Youth Poetry Fellowship programs. This year, Seattle Arts and Lectures will serve more than 4,000 public school students at 34 public schools and at Seattle Children's Hospital. Tonight's writer is Eros Nelson from the Center School, who worked with WITS writer Corinne Manning. Please join me in warmly welcoming Eros Nelson.
O mother, bring me home. I stare up into the clouds and grieve the world that we have lost. I plead with Mother Earth to return to her warm and welcoming grasp. As I lay there, dirt rubbing against my skin, I wish to be returned in the harshest way possible. I imagine all the ways she could reclaim what is rightfully hers. Behind my eyes, I see myself sink deeper into the ground, her vines wrapping around me, holding me close as a mother to her child. My head pointed directly at the sky, eyes wide open forever to be blinded by the sun and only given rest when the moon is awake. I become a part of the scenery. Lavender bursts from my veins, wrapping around my wrists and through my fingers. Daisies grow from my throat and bloom through my lips, decorating my mouth, finally giving my voice a rest. At last, I am one with her again, as all nature should be.
Thank you, Eros. It is a real pleasure to co-host this evening with three groundbreaking adventurers who made history on May 12, 2022, as part of the first all-Black expedition to summit Mount Everest. The Full Circle team joins a long legacy of Black American outdoors people and explorers. From Sophia Dannenberg and Charles Crenshaw to James Beckworth, back in the 19th century, the ingenuity of these leaders has helped inspire new pathways for people of color to thrive in community outside, even amid the forces of environmental racism and the perils of our climate crisis. As team lead Philip Henderson told Men's Journal shortly after the summit, Full Circle gets its name because it's, quote, really about each of us giving back, continuing that legacy of one person making opportunities and providing comfort and space for another person. Tonight, we are joined by Philip Henderson, the expedition's team lead and the executive director of Full Circle Expeditions. Philip's passion for outdoor recreation, education, skiing, and climbing has provided him with opportunities to travel the world. He has been on several major expeditions beyond Everest, including Denali, Kilimanjaro, and Mount Kenya. As an educator, he has assisted in training guides, rangers, and porters on several expeditions, and he has worked tirelessly through volunteer programs to promote outdoor activities among underrepresented communities. Dom Mullins is a sociologist, combat veteran of Operation Iraqi Freedom, and pioneering adventurer whose remarkable feats of grit and endurance against all odds are inspiring the next generation of diverse adventurers. Dom is among the most influential voices in the outdoor adventure community, known for his endeavoring spirit and unyielding tenacity, as well as his ability to impart these traits into his teams on the journey to unlocking peak performance to achieve a shared purpose. Adina Scott is an adventurer, nerd, and artist who has grown up in the Pacific Northwest. Adina has made a career of supporting science and discovery in the US, Antarctica, and India. She has volunteered as an outdoor educator with the YMCA Bold and Gold Mountain School in Seattle. Along with being on the Full Circle team, she has participated in the NOLS Expedition Denali and has hiked, climbed, and skied in many inspiring areas. This team's advocacy and audaciousness points us to ways we can more holistically heal our planet and heal ourselves. As we reimagine what a liberated future looks like, one where all of us can seek joy and solace in nature, this is a story to hold in our mind's eye, the blazing, gritty tale of an amazing team who has stood on top of the world. Please join me in welcoming to the stage the Full Circle Everest team.
We have to move our mics closer to our, should I say faces? Is that too awkward to say that? Allison, thank you so much wherever you are for the incredibly generous introduction. And Eros, for your incredibly beautiful poem. Thank you so much. As Allison shared, my name is Mitsu Iwasaki. I am the Northwest Director for the Trust for Public Land. Our work is to connect everyone to the outdoors. With me tonight are Phil, Adina, and Dom. There are a few folks from the team that are not here tonight, and maybe I wonder if one of you might share who they are.
Yeah, it would be easier if we go off this picture, eh? Oh, man.
We're back. We're back.
All right.
You got to do it without the cliff notes.
All right, let's do it fast. All right, so we have Eddie over here on the left. Eddie's a rock climber, amazing climber. We have KG right next to him here in the orange. KG is Kenyan. He's the first Kenyan summit, Everest summit. And then we have Abby here in purple. Abby's a rock climber. She owns a rock climbing gym in Florida. We have Manoa. He behind her. He is a North Face athlete. And then Rosemary next to her. Rosemary is a mountain guide, incredible climber as well.
Also, big Seattle connection with Rosemary. She spent a lot of time living here.
True indeed.
Hometown.
And then we have Thomas next to Rosemary. Thomas is an entrepreneur and also big mountain athlete. And then last but not least, we got Fred. And Fred is also a local to Seattle, an ice climber.
In addition to the Full Circle team, there were Sherpa people and Nepalese people, individuals who supported the expedition. So we wanted to also make time to recognize those individuals. If you have any questions for our speakers at any time tonight, there was a QA code with your registration email. Please enter your questions, and somehow magically it will show up on my pad here. What else? Logistic. I think that's it. I'm super excited to have this conversation, and why don't we just go ahead and get started? So maybe we start with what is and what was the Full Circle Everest expedition. So what is Full Circle, and what was the first Full Circle Everest expedition?
I think that question is pointed at me, Mitsu.
Clearly, I am looking at you.
Right. No, I mean, I think you guys heard it earlier. Again, my name is Philip. Full Circle really was about giving back. And I actually learned that back in the early 90s when I started working in the outdoor industry. And I realized that there were people out there who wanted to know about camping and hiking and skiing and climbing and stuff like that. They just didn't know how, at least from my community. And so it's funny because my mother would always have somebody come over to the house when I come home, and she'd say, "Oh, it's my son. He's the one who does that outdoor stuff." And people would have interest in it, and I would always say, "Well, okay, come." And so I think it was 1999, I actually ran a first trip with friends that were just, they happened to be from LA, from the Bay Area or whatever, but they just had an interest in wanting to get outside. And so they came out to Wyoming, and we ran a trip for a week. And that was kind of how that started in giving back. So when we started the expedition, they were like, "Well, what's going to be the name for this expedition?" And I told the team that story. And we decided to adopt that name and just put Everest Expedition behind it. So, yeah.
And we had a conversation earlier, Dom, you, Phil, and I, and we talked a little bit about how this team came together, and that it wasn't simply that you all looked out and said, "We want to pick these folks." You've all had a path that all converged together for this expedition. I wonder if either Dom, you, or Phil might speak a little bit to how this team came together.
Yeah, it was really serendipitous. If you hear the story, the way that we met, it was all sort of happenstance. And I think that centrifuge that we all kind of pivoted around was at the North Face, and particularly in a North Face athlete, Conrad Anker. And so I had the opportunity to befriend Conrad Anker and ice climb with him a bit. And in several years, like, he had told me about Philip Henderson. Philip was kind of like a, what do you call that, a unicorn? You know, because African-American dude who worked in the outdoor industry for 30 years. And it's like, I never seen a dude like that, just heard stories about him. And so then finally, I had the opportunity to be introduced to Phil, and Philip also had the opportunity to meet, in just by chance, all these other athletes that wound up being part of our project. So, and somehow everybody was like 1 degree off of Conrad Anker, the North Face athlete. So, I just throw this in there, before my expedition with Full Circle, the only other black person that I ever climbed with was also Manoa on the team. I had been mountaineering and ice climbing for 10 years by the time we were doing Everest together, and I had only climbed with one other black person, and that was Manoa on the team. So.
And Adina, thank you, Dom. Adina, what was your journey to the Full Circle Everest team?
Well, so as was mentioned in the intro, I did a trip to Denali in 2013. Rosemary was on that trip too. The two of us had a great time there. And while we were hanging out at 14 Camp, there happened to be another camp of folks that had a big happening space, and Philip was there with Conrad and a bunch of their friends. And so we kind of got stuck there for, I don't know, a good week and a half waiting for the weather up higher on the mountain to get good. Like, where we were at, it was gorgeous, and then up high it was just blowing. So we were just hanging out, just chilling, partying, waiting for good weather, like any good mountaineer. And so that's when I first got to know Phil. And then, fast forward a while and get this little phone call out of the blue. It's like, hey, how you doing? Just catching up, like, by the way, we're going to Everest. You coming? And I think a lot of the people on the team have like a similar like phone call coming from out of the blue story as well.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I just want to throw something in there in that, I had been living in out of the country for 3 years. And during that period of time is when Dom, Manoa, and Fred were climbing with Conrad. And then when we reconnected and we started talking about the team, we wanted to be gender neutral. We wanted to have as many females as we did males on the team. But finding black women that had mountaineering skills was hard. And it's just the fact that I had been on Denali with them. And then Rosemary came to Chile when I was living in Chile. She was a part of a program for Knowles there. I ran a trip to Kilimanjaro in 2018 for Outdoor Afro, and there were more women on the trip than there were men. I needed another guide. Rosemary was. And so Rosemary and I have been on 3 continents, 3 big mountains together over that period, in 10 years. And then there was Eddie, who I met Eddie kind of the same whim as I met Fred and Manoa. I just turned around and there he was. Like just out of the blue, right? And he was ice climbing in Ouray, and we exchanged phone numbers. I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but when I pitched the project to Eddie, I told him I was 95% sure that it was going to happen. And he thought I said we had 95% of the funding that we needed to make it happen. And so he jumped right in, not knowing the work he was going to have to do. But it really, but I make these points is because when I was building the team, it wasn't like I'm just going out to find 10 black people to go climb Everest to make a point. Right? That was when I met Fred and Manoa, that was in January of 2019, before pandemic, before social unrest in the United States that had been happening for a long time, but it was before that. So all of our paths just happened to kind of, everybody has a story. I have 20, 30 years of it. Everybody else has another 15, 10 years of whatever story they have to get them to that point. And it just so happened that Conrad was a part of that. Our lives just were there. And so we made it happen, so, yeah.
Yeah. In my experience, climbing is a lot of work. Maybe there's a little bit of suffering in there. There's a lot of time invested and resources invested into this. And I think we do it because there's something that draws us to climbing. And I think there's also a great deal of joy in it. And let's talk a little bit about that. Like, what is the joy that you find in climbing? Who wants to start?
Oh man, so when we did the Denali trip, it was amazing because it's like, I feel like when you interact with the outdoor industry and the outdoor world and you like, you like watch these movies and so it's like, boom. And then, it was like something death-defying happened and they weren't sure if they were going to make it. And so there were folks filming this and they put together a trailer for the thing. And I'm like, we're trying to go out and give this message of like inspiring people to come do it. And it was like one of the 2 days that it was like blowing and the whole thing's like, boom, and I just like watched that and I was like, man, just watching this like minute of this makes this trip look really miserable. And it's like, I look through my camera and there's a lot of laughter, there's a lot of dance parties, there's some of the most beautiful, it's not quite sunrises and sunsets because it's Alaska in the summer, but the colors when the sun dips and magical time. We like, when we were stuck there, we put in like a 9-hole golf course and had a putter and having people to just share that with so much joy. I mean, like look at these folks. Like, don't you want to be stuck on a mountain with them too? Like, so yeah. That was when Philip called about the full circle thing, and I was just like, not so sure about this, but it's gonna be fun. So can't not do it. So I mean. I'm really lucky I come from an outdoorsy family. Hi, Mom and Dad, out there, somewhere out here.
Where's Mom and Dad?
Where are they?
Oh,
Right there.
Right there. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, as they'll tell you, sometimes I was joyous, sometimes I wasn't so joyous as a tiny little person to do this, but having grown up with it, to me, it's like, it's just become really integral in spending this time outside and with people and in places that are magical and finding the right people to do it with, really, there's nothing like it.
Yeah. And I think one of the significant things about that trip on Denali 2013, because it was the 100th anniversary of the first summit of Denali, 100 years ago, previous to that. And there was a gathering at 14 Camp of all the climbers who were there for that period of time. And to me, it was kind of an arrow pointing in a direction of, like, things are changing. Because you had never seen that many people of color on Denali ever in 2013, 100 years previous, so, yeah.
I wonder, Dom, or maybe I just cut you off. You and I were introduced by a mutual friend, Stacy Bear.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right? And well, I know Stacy, and you know Stacy as I don't know him as a veteran, but you know him as a veteran.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and we've had some conversations around climbing relative to your service and I don't know, replacing some of the things is that the right way to say that? Replacing some of the experiences that that you had in your service
Yeah.
through climbing and camaraderie and closeness with people. And I wonder if you might talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I would say, and this is also related to your question about the joy of climbing and the joy of exploring the mountains or exploring wilderness, is, for me, I grew up in Brooklyn, so I didn't know anything about wilderness, Prospect Park was wilderness to me. And so I learned about wilderness a lot when I was in the Army. In fact, that was my first encounter with wilderness, was when I was in the Army, and I actually fell in love with it. But it didn't even have a name for me because I didn't learn how to camp when I was, a kid or anything like that. It was like, this is Army stuff,
Yeah.
And when I got out of the Army, Stacy was the one who introduced me to, I'm about to say, Army stuff in the civilian world, but no, it's mountaineering. And I realized that I knew a significant amount about mountaineering just because of my service in the military. Yeah. So part of the joy of climbing for me was realizing, that I had an education that was conducive to all of that, but I didn't even know it, and discovering that. And so I actually wasn't on Denali the year that these guys were on Denali in 2013. I was on there in 2015, and I was there with a veterans group. And I was about to say, actually, when you were talking about the most black people that you ever seen on Denali, I was there 2 years later, so 2 seasons later, and I was the only black dude on the whole mountain then. But yeah, so, but I learned how to climb with a veterans group, and so it became a vehicle for community for me after service, and also to get myself in the sort of exciting trouble that I missed, Yeah. And I obviously I found a lot of it. So.
You're talking about Phil as exciting trouble?
Oh, Phil always brings exciting trouble.
Will you talk a little bit about joy in climbing for you?
Actually, the joy in climbing to me is I just like doing things with my hands. And so it's the technical aspect and the problem solving, as well as if you've ever had birds flying below you, to me that's one of the joys of climbing, is just being in that world that animals are flying below you.
Yeah.
But actually it's, the way I grew up, it wasn't a joy, it was kind of an escape, to be honest about it. And that's, my father we lived in the suburbs when I was very young, and I went to a school that I was one of very few maybe 3 black people. I was the only one in my class for a long time, maybe 2 or 3 years. And walking to school on a trail to me was actually more fun. I was more interested in that than I was going to school. So to me, being outdoors, and to me, climbing, boating, skiing, fishing, whatever it is, it's like, oh, I'm just peaceful here. I'm happy. I'm free. Yeah. So that's really the joy, whether it's climbing, boating, skiing, it doesn't matter. But then the growth that I've got out of that as well, and just being able to travel and so on. Like, cultural connection for me has come through climbing, through being in the mountains. Yeah.
Yeah, so Mount Everest is, let's just call it daunting. It's the world's tallest peak at 29,000 feet and some change, I think. Mm-hmm. And it's drawn all of our imaginations, and it's drawn all of our climbers since Tenzing Norgay and Sir Edmund Hillary climbed it in 1953, I think. As you thought about this expedition, Phil, I think you thought a lot about how to build community, and when you might show up in Nepal with this team, and how you might build relationships with the Nepalese community and the Sherpa community. Will you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. When I got my first opportunity to connect with folks in Nepal, when I started volunteering for the Khumbu Climbing School, that would have been 2006. I'd been on Denali the year before that, and In 2006, which is actually the first year that Sophia Dannenberg summited Everest, as well as the first Black American, let alone female. But I was working with the Sherpas because their mortality rate was a lot higher than Western climbers. So my introduction to Everest even, or just the Khumbu region, was working with the Sherpa community and the Nepali community. And I did that for approximately 5 years before going to Everest the first time in 2012. So for me, it was, I'm an educator first before being a climber or a boater. So being in that, and making that connection with the community was very important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember my first time in Yosemite, right? It's 30 some odd years ago. And when you drive in, El Cap is really daunting. It's big and it's daunting. But what I found to be more daunting than the actual climbing was the climbing community. And this is 30 years ago, right? And I found that to be really inaccessible, right? And you need the community, and you need to get data from them to be able to climb some of these things in the style that you might want to. I wonder if you all might talk a little bit about what it means to be different and gaining access to these communities.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a significant part of our experience, or the experience of the members of Full Circle. I mean, being a person of color in the outdoor community, in the outdoor industry, particularly, mountaineering, I know, we all have had experiences where, I mean, we find ourselves obviously the only person of color in a whole situation in the mountains. And that, Phil and I talk about this all the time. It's kind of, I mean, before I experienced that in the outdoor community, I had become very accustomed to having that type of experience, like in other institutions, in my professional life, when I was in the military, so other experiences in life where that were really similar in that sense, where I was the only person of color in this situation, or I'm the only person of color in this particular community. And so when I encountered that when I encountered that in the outdoor community, it was actually funny to me, because I didn't realize it at first, because I had become so used to it in other spaces, like when I was in the military. Actually, the funniest thing is when I was climbing with Stacy Bear, who was another veteran who introduced me to climbing. He took me to climb a 14er in Colorado, and I didn't know anything about climbing, and I hadn't done anything like that, since I came out of the military. So I showed up in Timberland boots, it's like, let's do it, And I remember on the mountain, these ladies on the mountain, they were like, wow, I didn't know that black people climbed. Where are you from? I was like, well, I guess black people don't climb, but I'm here right now, so it was other people who noticed it before I did, that I'm doing something that, typically you don't see black people doing. But I had many experiences like that prior to that, so it wasn't so out of place. I think now is a productive moment or space where we've come in the outdoor industry, where we're starting to have conversations about this and how to make these spaces more conducive to diverse peoples, It'll lead to better outdoor education for the community in general, and it'll lead to better rapport and even earnings for the companies in the outdoor industry. So it's a win-win situation for everybody involved, right? But generally, yeah, I mean, in my situation, I had become accustomed to being the only person of color in certain situations, so I didn't even notice it at first. Yeah.
I feel like my experience with this is that I wasn't the only person of color in my community coming into this because I came from family. And so having grown up in that space, it wasn't until I was interacting with the outdoor industry, which I would say is different than interacting with the outdoors. I'd already been spending time in the outdoors for years and years before I started volunteering for the YMCA, the Bold Gold Mountain School here in Seattle. A friend of mine kind of brought me in, and I was working with them. And sort of that was my first introduction to the outdoor industry, to outdoor education, to this whole bigger space. And like I said, having grown up just playing outside was comfortable. And I didn't really want to raise my voice or get involved. And then I was out on a course with some middle school boys, and we were out hiking, and we're just like la 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 la, and so, some of the kids on our course are just kind of like dying, and they're just having a really hard time. And one of the kids looks up at me. He's like, "This is really hard for us, and you keep saying it's good for us. It's so easy for you. What do you do when you want to do something hard?" And that kind of stuck with me, because I was like, well, yeah, I'm in my happy place. This isn't hard. But something that is hard for me is getting up in front of people or being a figurehead or speaking out. And so, that's when I was approached. That's about the same time I was approached about doing Expedition Denali, and that was really my first introduction to starting to look at this in a bigger context. So I came from the flip side of that.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. And Phil?
I'm going to bring you back around full circle. In that, when I first started working, I was like, I didn't grow up skiing or anything. I had access to things, but nobody to tell me what to do. It's kind of like I was doing things in the outdoors before there was the industry, right? But when I started working at Knowles, I was the only Black and American instructor there for 6 years. Like, none of my coworkers that I worked with, either in the office or in the field, the students looked like me. But then while I'm hearing Adina tell this story, I'm like, here's the full circle part of it, because whatever is in the past is in the past, but we want to normalize being in the outdoors and that connection to the outdoors. My daughter was on skis when she was 1. Adina came on the trip, and she was the only person who had been to Nepal previously.
Aside from you.
What's that?
Aside from you.
Aside from me, yeah. But it was when she was 7, because her parents took her there. Okay, so now my daughter's been to Nepal twice, and she is raised within the industry. She's doing these things, so it's normalized for her. So I can blame all the things that happened previously, but if I don't change that moving forward, then that's on me. So that's that full circle. It's like, well, you didn't have this, but provide it for someone else, because I know what the benefits are of that. Yeah.
Earlier today, we had a conversation about being outside and needing to be outside, like fully buttoned up and tight. Maybe buttoned up is not the right word for outdoor outfits, but buttoned up and tight, because people are watching and you're representing. And might you talk a little bit more about that?
About how we represent.
Yeah.
And why it's important.
Yeah.
And how we show up.
Yeah.
And what does really being a part of outdoors really mean?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a light conversation.
No, but you've heard me say, we've talked about it, right? Yeah. And again, I can get pigeonholed as a climber. I'm not a climber. I'm a person who's made their living in the outdoors, but the outdoors is a lifestyle as well. So to me, and there are other things we'll be here all night if I tell these other stories, but gardening is enough for me, just being outside. And so if that's what gets you outside is gardening, then you get outside. If it's climbing or boating or biking or whatever it is, then that's what you do. And that's the beauty of it to me, is that we're more connected to nature than we are to each other, to people, to each other. And I think that's the missing link that makes us, in that sense, yeah.
So through the Full Circle Everest expedition, the number of Black Americans that have stood on the summit of Mount Everest, I think went from 11 to 18. And that's an achievement that I think helps to start redefining who is out there and who our mentors or who our role models might become. And I think there's an incredible amount of weight and responsibility of being the first, right? Representing the community and a sense of not having space to fail at this either, right? Because you're both creating space, but creating a narrative for future. And I wonder if one of you might talk a little bit about what that means.
Well, I think a really scary thing about showing up publicly and showing up out loud is that people are going to think what they think. And so if you show up and you're just kind of a junk show and are representing an ideal or speaking for an ideal, then people are like, So it's like, showing up to go for like a hike or a climb with the homies is like one thing, or it's just like, I have a friend of mine, the two of us, like, we were classic for like always forgetting to bring appropriate shoes, so we were always climbing everything in like flip-flops or slippers, or it could be anything. And it's like, when you show up publicly and do that, you're not just showing up as yourself being a goofball, you're showing up and people are going to judge a community based on that. And so something really scary going into this is like, as we got started and there was more and more momentum and more eyeballs on it, it was just like, I know we all good, I know if we were just doing this, we'd be having the best time, but like, we can't, we gotta, we do have our, we do have expertise. Everybody there has a lot of experience, but also it's just like, ooh, did I get my hair good? Did I show up right? Are my crampons good? Do I have anything hanging off? Like, it's like all of those extra anxieties of what people will think if you show up how they don't expect you to show up. And the outdoor industry can be a pretty darn judgy place at times, and some of that, sometimes it's for good reasons and sometimes it's not. So just being confident in our own abilities was kind of hard.
I'm laughing because you just made me remember that, on top of all of our professionalism and everything and all the gear and everything and systems that we have knowledge of in mountaineering, attacking this big mountain, I remember there was one point when a bunch of the members of our team were sitting around making sure that nobody was ashy. It's like, check it out.
It's
You
real.
can look at a lot of different mountaineering teams, but only on our team are we worried about if people's ashy. But I think, just to echo what Adina is saying, in trying to approach this professionally and trying to, and then acknowledging that we're going big in front of the nation and in front of the world, and that there are going to be so many people who can potentially be inspired by our project. There are so many people who also can be in some way discouraged by our project if it's unsuccessful and if we show this a very unprofessional and unprepared face of mountaineering as people of color. So we had to approach that responsibility as well. So certainly if we were just hanging out, going to climb, preparing this together, we would have been having a great time the entire time, but we also had to address the politics of it and be cognizant of it because of the space that we were stepping into.
Oh, thank you. A few months ago, I was having a conversation with Dr. Jocelyn Imani, who leads the Trust for Public Lands Black History and Culture commitment. And she talked about a place called Nicodemus, all-Black community where she felt comfortable and that there were no boundaries for her. Can be anywhere in that space and feel safe and comfortable. And Phil, you and I were talking about your first trip to Kenya, and walking into that space and being perceived differently than perhaps climbing here in the States. And could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's actually because it ties to something I said earlier in the fact that I was the first Black American instructor to work for Knowles. And I worked in the field for 6 years. I did a lot of things for him for 6 years, but Knowles had been operating in Kenya for 25 years. And, but they had never had a Black instructor come from America to go to Kenya. So when I went there, it threw them off base. They didn't. And so there are literally two different instances. But the first thing is that right off the bat, I had always thought that we hiked too much, we moved too fast, we moved too far. We just did so much. People couldn't really just get a foundation and enjoy. It was just something, and I battled it, but it was always pushed back against me. And then I went to Kenya, and it was like night and day. It was like, oh, there's just a cultural difference between the way we roll and what's important, right?
Thank you. We've got a couple more questions I want to ask you all, but if you have questions, please start typing them in so that I can get it on my pad and start incorporating those conversations in as well. I think there's a lot of words and behaviors that attempt to exclude people of color, people who are different from the outdoor spaces, right? I often think about the word overcrowding, and yeah, I get that there's a lot more people out there, but it also signals that people that don't look like the traditional users may not be welcome out there. You know, and also terms like authentic experiences. And I think some of these terms might harm our ability to find joy and find comfort outdoors. Yeah, do you have any thoughts on language and the words that we use?
I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about those things. I mean, yeah, to the extent that those terms are just sort of euphemistic ways to exclude people from using the space, it's, you know, we're constantly in this tug of war between trying to have our own authentic experiences outdoors and also trying to share the space so other people can have those experiences, you know. And we have to be aware of the different levels at which people have those experiences. You know, I think one thing that's really cool about our message that, Full Circle's message that Phil was just talking about is that we're really encouraging people to get outside and get outside at their level. You know, whatever outdoor intervention it is that works for you. So, you know, it doesn't have to be the most arduous, most extreme thing that you're planning your life around. You know, 2 years training for a summit of some, you know, mountain, remote mountain range. You know, it could just be birding. You know, taking a walk through the park where you get the opportunity to have a picnic or sit on a bench or, you know, just get outside and experience the space. And I think it's important for us to always be mindful of the ways in which we make those public spaces conducive to being shared, you know? So one of the things is like we can use these buzzwords that we use to the exclusion of other people, but what are they burdened down with? What are we really talking about? Are we upset with overcrowding because of the management of the land or how it stresses the land? So then maybe what we're really talking about is like outdoor education and bestowing that knowledge to the community so they can leave no trace, so that, more crowding can be sustainably managed. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So instead of trying to use buzzwords that maybe exclude people or make it feel like it's jeopardizing your authentic experiences, we can look at the other side of it of like, how can we make these spaces conducive to being shared so that we can provide these authentic experiences for people, right? So yeah, so is overcrowding about trash management? Well, maybe it's leave no trace. That is the intervention that we need so that that's not such a burden on the system, So, we had to think like that in terms of, we can't manage. Think about what happened during coronavirus. All these people who are cramped up in their houses are just like, oh man, I'm gonna be, weekend warrior rock climber, here we go. And then you have like more rescues out there, So maybe we need to develop ways or, that push outdoor education to the community so that, we could be more prepared to manage in situations like that. Or in times when, we were in jeopardy of like a government shutdown, so then parks are shut down, and we have less ability to manage the capacity of people who want to get outdoors. I don't think that any exclusionary tactics or language, will help us manage the problem. But if we think about, how to get our facilities up to par so that, we can absorb it, or the knowledge in our communities up to par so that we can absorb, these sorts of problems or manage it effectively, that's kind of where, that's kind of the point of the whole thing. It's not to exclude people because we can. It's really how can we include it, but how can we include more people, and how can we sustainably manage it?
And perhaps build more infrastructure as well, right? Yeah. There's plenty of space out there, I think. I'm going to go to a few, thank you, Dom, and then I'm going to go to a couple of questions here before we talk a little bit more about the movement of Full Circle. Any thoughts on the tension between tourism on Everest and the sacredness of the space in the mountain?
Can you repeat that?
Thoughts on the tension between tourism on Everest and the sacredness of the mountain? Or is there a tension there at all?
I know I have my opinion on that. I'd actually like to hear Don's opinion from his standpoint.
I feel like I got a big mouth right now. And I mean, one thing, so when we think about Full Circle Expedition, we had the opportunity to be integrated into the Sherpa Nepalese climbing community well before the expedition started. And it's because Phil had such deep ties with the community, he launched a trip for us there in January. And our expedition wouldn't start until April. And so we got to meet so many people and the families of many of the climbers who would be climbing with us, and we worked with them in the school, and we were really embedded in the community by that time. And for me, especially, because I went in January, and unlike the rest of Full Circle, I didn't return. And so I stayed in the Khumbu for like 6 months and climbing Everest, and it was amazing. By the time the expedition proper started, not only did I know all the Sherpa Nepalese people who were climbing with us, I know their wives, I know their cousins, I know their uncles' uncles, and so I really felt like I was well integrated into the community. And so, Mitsu, to get to your question of like this dichotomy between the sanctity of the mountain of Everest, of Chomolungma, and then also the marketability of it, or these big guiding companies and the stress on it from tourism. The truth is that we have to embrace that it's actually one coin, and these are just two different sides of the same coin, because I realized in us launching this expedition directly after coronavirus that the lack of expeditions on Everest was a huge hit to the economy there. And so by not having climbers from all over the world patronize guiding companies in Nepal, it did nothing but hurt them, you know? And so we could say that we don't want to stress the environment by, I mean, again, we come to this buzzword, right, of overcrowding, right, overuse or what have you. But the truth is, like, with lack of use, you know, the entire, you know, environment there and the communities were really desperate to have travelers come through. And the wildest thing is this. Oh, this is really wild, in fact. Because all these stickers, right, in Nepal was Nepal 2020. Because Nepal had set up in the year 2020 to have like this huge expansion of tourism and invite people from all over the world, climbers from all over the world to come there and climb in 2020. And what happened? A pandemic. So all of the paraphernalia that you get in Nepal right now was printed for Nepal 2020. And it's like, it's 2022 when we were doing the expedition and we still walking around with these stickers and everybody's trying to give them to you because they got an excess of them, you know? So they understand how important the tourism industry is there. And they were setting up to really give it a huge thrust. And then coronavirus happened, which was the opposite of what they thought was gonna happen. So imagine how many businesses took a hit. Imagine how many people put up so much investment to expand their business for that big boom of tourism, and then they got nothing, and it crashed. So I was able to see a lot of that by running around in the Khumbu for 6 months, and you realize that, you know, one of the reasons why, this is very interesting actually too, because one of the reasons why there are Tibetan ways to address Everest and Chomolungma, and then there is the Sherpa Nepalese word. What is the Sherpa Nepalese word? Sagarmatha. And when you ask Sherpa people about the name of Sagarmatha and, you know, the symbolism that's associated with the mountain, it's actually like the giver of life and like allowing people to provide for their family. I mean, I don't think that the symbolism could get more blatant for you, right? It's like, this helps us provide for our families. And so it's two sides of the same coin, you know? That the sanctity of the mountain and the respect that people have for it is mixed in with the way that they are able to provide for their families and subsist off of the tourism industry. And so once again, we have, you know, in our desire to have these authentic high mountain experiences, we have to also address the fact that use, you know, not overuse, but use, we have to find a way to maintain that and balance that within, you know, within the means.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, I'm talking too much.
No, we love it. Yeah. Here's another question. Share some highs and lows from the expedition. Maybe we'll go to Adina first.
Ooh, there were some really great dance parties. There was lots of good. There was like always music happening, and so like we had. Well, first off, if you went to the kitchen tent, there was always music happening, and there was always a bunch of people hanging out, and so I loved spending time in the kitchen tent. And you know, sometimes folks are talking in Sherpa and Nepali, and I don't understand, but we're all laughing together anyways. And sometimes it's in English, and we're sharing music with each other, sharing dances with each other, just having a really great time. I mean. I think everyone had at least one or two rough days, so it's like it's one of these. It's a big, long, like marathon kind of a trip. So it's really hard to pick out like a high and a low. There's like lots and lots of roller coasters, and our roller coasters aren't all happening at the same time. So I don't know. I like to focus on the highs because they're really great. But you know, I mean, it's like the exertion is a challenge, the altitude's a challenge, the being away from home is a challenge, unfamiliar food is a challenge. I love these folks, but sometimes we get on each other's last nerve, you know, especially when you're not like feeling super hot. So yeah, it's really hard for me to like pick out one because it's just this big, long, expansive experience.
Thank you. Phil, you were smiling over there. I know you've got something on your mind.
No, I'll start with that. Actually, there's icing. I'll start with the icing on the cake, and that's that. You know, previously to 2022, there had been 11 black people around the world who had summited Everest. And to our expedition, we changed that number from 11 to 18 in a day. So one expedition. So to me, that's the icing on the cake. But the high is the relationship, because the goal was, that was one of the goals for sure, but the other goal was that I wanted people from our community, because I think I've been to Nepal 12 times, something like that. I hadn't seen many people who looked like me. And the fact that we only know 11 other people who had been to Everest who were black people from around the world, I know that there's a discrepancy of people who can actually talk about Sherpas and their culture from experience, not from what they read in a magazine or see in the movies or whatever. As well as people who have gone to Everest and know what climbing Everest is like. There wasn't people in our community who can talk about that. So to me, that's a high, to have 10 other people that I know that have been to Everest who can talk about it from experience, and have Sherpa and Nepali friends who, like, they know them by name, they know their families and so on. That's the other high for me. And then the other one is the fact that everybody came home, because to me that's success. Dom talked about it earlier. In that the biggest risk we had was that affecting a whole community of future outdoor people who may not want to do it simply because of what they saw in 2022. But because they saw something that basically touched not just our society, but the world, then that changes the game. So to me, that's the biggest high. Lows is, and it's not even a low for me. For some people will look at it as a low, because what's the first thing people will ask you if you've been to Everest? What was it like standing on top? Did you summit? I've been to Everest twice and I haven't summited. But my goal again was to be the best leader, to lead an expedition as possible. So it's a low in terms of not summiting, but when they win, I win. And that's teamwork. So we're all the team, we all won.
Yeah, I mean, the impact of going from 11 to 18 is just astronomical. And that actually segues into another question. There's somebody here that works in Seattle Public Schools. And their North Seattle school is about 40% African Americans. Any ideas on how we might get more African American kids into the outdoors? Or out into the outdoors? Is that a better way to say that?
Well, I mean, Seattle is such a great place to do this. We have so much access here. And so, I mean, something that I find incredible, it's like, North Seattle, go to Carkeek Park and watch the salmon. You can ride the bus there, and being in a space like this where there are a lot of programs, there are a lot of community programs, there's a lot of support. And as somebody who's like working directly with young people, like helping the young people in your school find those programs, find those community programs. There are programs through the YMCA, through like Big Brothers, Big Sisters, through all kinds of community spaces. Another great accessible thing is, and there are organizations like the Mountaineers that offer instruction, and indoor climbing gyms are a great place to be in an urban area and mix with people who have a lot of knowledge and a lot of access. And there are quite a number of them around the Seattle area. A lot of them have programs with schools, and a lot of them are accessible through public transportation or walking or on a bike. And so having these kinds of resources and looking into these kinds of programs, like I used to help out at a after-school program at Vertical World where we would work with young women, and there are a lot of things like this in the Seattle area, and so just orienting folks towards those kinds of resources. And, like we've been saying about getting outside, it's kind of like, I often wonder sort of like, where's this line between going for a walk in the park? What makes it a hike? Why does that need to be a line? Like, we have these great public parks here that are so accessible, and like, I love hiking around those parks. And I don't know if the transit system still does it, but they had a Trailhead Direct bus thing. Do they still do that here?
They still do that here.
Oh yeah, so being able to like get out to North Bend and do some of those like bigger objectives, like all of these things are accessible, and a lot of it is connecting with the people, the community, the mentorship to make it happen. And there's a lot here in the Seattle area that can do that.
Thank you. There's a black rock climber out there somewhere. I'm wondering, how do they find funding for their adventures and their travels?
Yeah, I think that underscores, so when you ask the question of, how do we get more people of color or black people in these outdoor spaces, and Adina makes the point of like there are organizations that are offering these services or trying to help facilitate these outdoor experiences for diverse peoples. Well, what we can do is donate to those organizations. They exist, they need funding, they have annual budgets, they have objectives that they'd like to meet, and they need funding in order to meet those objectives. As I said, I grew up in Brooklyn. There was no way, I didn't even think about having outdoor experiences or anything like that because I had never experienced anything like that. So I couldn't even have the, let's say, interest to go and look up a name of an organization that provides hikes for me to go do it, because that's not part of my reality. I live in Brooklyn, you know what I'm saying? I'm not looking for places to go and hike, you know what I'm saying? But an organization that facilitates those types of experiences that can, let's say, advertise to me, market its product to me, and then bring me into a knowledge of these things. Wow, now I'm in a knowledge of the entire outdoor industry. And so, how can those organizations pronounce themselves to the communities that they serve without the funds to do so? Without the funds to bring those types of experiences to people. So if we're not working actively with those organizations, we can donate a few dollars to them to facilitate other experiences for people. So I think we should all have our little pet projects like that we, follow along, and, that we drop, some cash to at certain points in the year, to just make sure that, other people are getting outside and they're facilitating experiences for people beyond our own community of people that we meet. Even if every one of us here went out and got a friend and said, hey, I'm gonna make sure that I'm offering or trying to provide an outdoor experience to a diverse person, a friend of mine even, that's just a drop in the bucket. That's like, you're not thinking about the greatest impact that you could have. But by offering, budgetary support, pecuniary support to some organizations that are facilitating those experiences, you offer those experiences well beyond your bounds, well beyond the boundary of your community, beyond, the people that you know, to other people. So we should all have organizations like that in these diverse communities that we can donate to. And if you don't know of a few organizations like that, well, there's one sitting up here, but there's many others that we can put you in touch with as well. So.
Yeah, and some of those organizations are tabling just outside this hall right now as well, or after when we're done. Yeah. We talked a little bit about the movement Full Circle, not about the expedition of Full Circle Everest. And so there's a question in here, what's next for Full Circle? And also, separately, for each of you, what's next for you all? So maybe we can start with what's next for Full Circle.
You know, what's next for Full Circle? It's a nonprofit. I started a nonprofit, and I'm doing the exact same thing that I've been doing for the last 30 years, and that's just helping people get outside. People say, well, how many people do you serve? Well, we'll serve anybody. And I have a saying, I won't say it here because it's not politically correct. Dom knows it, but we will work with anybody. But the thing is I realize that you have to reach kids before they're 5 years old, 6 years old. But you can also reach people who are 60 years old or 70 years old who just want to get outside and do something. We'll meet you where you are, and that could be anywhere from sitting on a park bench, birding, and even in your backyard or growing a tomato plant. If we have the resources to help you do that, we'll do it. To, you know, someone who's never been, I've had kids last week out of Memphis, Tennessee, who had never been out of Memphis, Tennessee. To people who have Kilimanjaro on their bucket list, and anything in between that, Everest, whatever. So I tell people, get in where you fit in, and there's more than just climbing. There's boating, there's skiing, there's biking, there's stand-up paddleboarding. There's so many things. There's walking your dog. And if you need help doing that, or you just need a resource, right? You just, how do I get into it, or where can I go? All of these things, we're there to help you. So the movement is, if you get outside and you want to help other people get outside, you're part of the Full Circle movement. It's that simple. Yeah.
Thank you. And what's next for you?
I have a 15-year-old daughter.
Yeah.
No, honestly, I say everything revolves around that, right? She's starting to drive and looking at colleges and all that, so my life really revolves around what's next for her. But I'm the executive director, and so not that I'm getting old, I still have things. I like to fish, I like to ski, I like to boat, but I don't need a lot. I can do all those things in an hour from my house. But if I can help other people get out and do things, then I'm happy, yeah.
Great. Thank you, Phil. Adina, what's next?
What's next? That's like the hardest question of the night. People who know me know that I'm not really that great at planning next things. But let's see. So I've been traveling a ton for work until recently, and I'm sort of a little bit more Pacific Northwest based for the foreseeable future. So I'm trying to build some nexts with building more community. I live in North Central Washington, so yeah, building more community where I live, and sitting still long enough to maybe have a couple personal mountain goals of my own for a change, because it's been a while since I just did some of that. So yeah, stay tuned.
Yeah. Staying tuned. Dom?
Yeah. I mean, I've been an expat for a while now, and but I've been repatriated. And I'm still alive. It's good. No, so I'm actually rehabilitating a rotator cuff injury, so what's next for me is definitely pull-ups. And I'm looking forward to more work with Full Circle. I'm looking forward to more events, spreading our message, and getting back into the mountains. I know I still have lots of big mountain aspirations. Very interestingly, I was watching a professional athlete earlier. I love it now that I've summited Everest, and I find so many people who make analogies about Everest. This is like, if you summited Everest, like, what would you do next? Climb another mountain? Why? It's like, actually, yeah. Yes. So I have lots of other mountains that I would love to climb. So I'd like to stay in shape with that and see how that shapes up. So.
Great, thank you. Also for each of you, what tips do you have for people of color who are interested in mountaineering and or climbing? How do we overcome the initial barrier of being the only?
The only?
The only person of color.
That's a hard one for me because I said it earlier. Me, I don't have barriers. I don't like. Just if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it, regardless. But that doesn't mean that there aren't things that you deal with once you're in that situation. But a barrier doesn't exist for me. I know that it exists for other people in a sense. Mm-hmm. But I think we use that word barrier in a ways that, yeah, what are we really talking about? Yeah. And it's really the effects of once you're in the door, the things that you deal with. Get out and climb. You can find a mentor. Find someone who's willing to take the time. And that's what we're here for. That's what we do. We're looking for those folks. And it's not just about, because honestly, I tell people this, if you think that you're always gonna have the experience of doing things in the outdoors, regardless of what that is, with people who look like you all the time, you might as well go over there and sit down because it's not gonna happen unless you make it happen.
Yeah.
But to give people to get them the foundations, that's what affinity groups, it creates a space for people to be comfortable to learn. Once they have that strong foundation, that confidence doing what they do, then it's easier for them to integrate into these other programs and learn and be a part of it and so on. So that's what I said. I mean, you got to get out and you got to want to do it.
So I think that, Phil, you touch on a real important thing that when you're, Mitsu, you're asking about being the only person of color in these circles. I think that it's difficult when, especially you're the only person of color and you're trying to learn in this space. You're trying to learn in a space where, you might not always find mentors in the people who are in a position to teach, especially if they have preconceived notions that you might not be competent, And so how do you develop competency in the outdoors and confidence in your skills, if you have that sort of dearth of community? And it isn't necessarily, I know that we focus on whether or not somebody looks like you is whether or not you can build community, but I mean, we're the United States of America. We didn't, just build it based on whether or not people looked at us, right? Or at least our values speak well beyond that, right? And so it's not necessarily about whether or not people simply look like you, but the sort of affinity that you can develop with people, how receptive you can be to people. And if you approach situations or you approach a situation where you're supposed to be a student and you're supposed to be open to learning, but you feel that your competence is questioned, it becomes difficult for you to be a curious student in that space, And so I think by fostering more diversity in the outdoor industry, you open it up to more people feeling comfortable being students in these spaces and not feeling like they would have their competence questioned or something like that, or people wouldn't have faith in them because of their competence, have faith in their competence because of their appearance, And so, that's a barrier. That has been a barrier. And hopefully by movements like this, you wind up with, more people who look more diverse in positions to teach outdoor skills, but that you also wind up with the broader outdoor community being more receptive to people who don't necessarily look like them or who they think, don't necessarily access this space. And so I think that these are things that are constantly the subtexts of activity in the outdoor industry when you are a diverse person.
Also, just be kind to yourself. Like, learning a new thing's hard. You're gonna look like a Gumby sometimes because you're brand new at it. And like, find your people. They don't have to look like you. In fact, unless you're an identical twin, they probably don't. And like, be kind to yourself of like, cool, I'm gonna show up, and sometimes I'm gonna do something a little weird or unexpected or whatever, and just if you find people who are gonna have fun with that and roll with it, cool. You've found your community, and look for people who want to meet you where you are and grow in the direction that you're trying to grow. And be kind to yourself on that journey. Be forgiving to yourself. You probably judge yourself way more harshly than most of the people who see you. Probably most of the people on the trail don't pay people on the trail a whole lot of mind, and we're sitting there, oh my goodness, I'm wearing the wrong layers for this, I'm doing the wrong thing, blah, blah, and it's like that all those like imposter syndrome-y thoughts, and it's like, just breathe. We're in a beautiful place. We're doing a cool thing. It might be hard. We might be kind of failing at it or winning at it or whatever. But yeah, just do.
Thank you. We've got about 6 minutes left before it's 9. So maybe this is the last question. Why is it important to foster passion for the outdoors for the next generation?
Well, I have like 2 answers for this. First off, like spending time outside has been great for me, and I love sharing things that I love with other people. And then there's the selfish answer of, if other people don't value nature, don't value outdoors, don't value these other things, then we're not going to make space for it in our society. And so having magic outside with other people helps me convince people this is something that's worth saving, worth doing, worth looking at. And because it's a source of inspiration for me, I want to both share that and perpetuate it.
Thank you. Any other thoughts?
No, I was serious when I said my next thing is my daughter, but I think like valuing that passion at a young age is really important, because it just builds a foundation. Not that I want her to be like me, right? I'm not Mike. But I wanted to have a strong foundation of that connection with nature. You heard me say it earlier, and I believe that we're connected more to nature than we are to each other. But I also feel like that without that connection to nature and that passion for it, you're not a whole person. You're only a part of who you can be without that connection. So I think that's the biggest reason to support that strong passion for a connection with nature. Yeah.
With that, I think we're approaching 9. I wanted to thank all 3 of you, Phil, Adina, Dom, for so generously sharing your time and your thoughts about climbing, the outdoors, access, etc. And also to Seattle Arts and Lecture for their partnership in this event, and all of you for taking time to be here with us tonight. And also for the folks who are joining us online as well. The Trust for Public Land, we are working to close that outdoor equity gap so that everyone everywhere has access to the outdoors, and would like to invite all of you to join our movement as TPL, as well as the movement Full Circle. There are a number of partners that are lining the hallways, tabling. Please stop by, learn about what they're doing, and do what you can to support those organizations as well. They are getting people outdoors as well. Yeah, thank you. That's it. do we just walk off the stage? Is that how this works?